This summer, my wife and I took a trip to Scandinavia. And it was on this trip that I began to think a lot about the idea of national unity, of a nation's soul, of that intangible glue that holds a people or a culture together. And you know, something happened on that trip that caused me to obsess about this. It was one evening, we were in Sweden visiting some friends who lived there. We were in their family room, the television set was on, and we saw on the screen thousands of people in Stockholm, in the public square, and going down the streets. And I thought, what is this, a protest? Is it a celebration? I don't speak Swedish, but it was pretty easy to figure out after a little while that those people were there to do a national sing-along. I was pretty amazed by that. And I said, what a unifying activity this is. Do you do this annually? And my host said, oh no, we do it every month. This sing-along on the Swedish version of national TV reminded me that, you know, we don't have a lot of shared experiences anymore in the media. We're all doing our own thing with the multiplicity of television channels and the internet and mobile devices and social media and everything else that's happening. No longer do we do things together at the same time in large scale in America. Last October, I was on a flight from Washington, D.C. to LAX, and I was watching the little television set stuck into the back of the seat in front of me, and the reason I was watching was because it was the night of the presidential debates. And as we were bouncing through the sky toward LA, I heard one of the presidential candidates call for an elimination of public broadcasting, get rid of Big Bird, all the siblings of Big Bird in public radio and public TV, and we don't need it, and we'll somehow balance the budget. I was really sad by this. I was encouraged by the fact that there was a huge outpouring of support in the next few weeks for public media from people in both political parties. And I also know that public media is far from out of the woods, and we're still under threat in this country. Amid all of the calls for getting rid of public media, I think about all of the things that are public that are challenged also in America. You know, public education has never really been able to return to the excellence of decades previously. We hear about roads and bridges and infrastructure that's falling down. We hear that the FAA doesn't have enough inspectors to inspect the airlines, and the FDA can't truly guarantee the quality and that our food won't be contaminated. We see the national parks reducing hours and having less visitors. And of course, we don't even come close to doing right by our returning veterans. And then I think about all the calls about wasted, bloated government. And the people who say government has to shrink, there's too much government, there's too much going into government. Now, I don't know anything about the national budget. I don't know anything about the way these departments and governments work. But I do know that we don't seem to have the money to provide the public services that need to be provided in this country, while at the same time we're all saying we've got government to be too big. And maybe that's just because we all hate paying taxes. I began searching for America's national soul, and in doing so, I thought about our culture of freedom. You know, maybe that's the place to begin, because our culture of freedom was guaranteed by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it's something we all share, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's also brought us something very amazing and unique in the world, and that is our amazing free market capitalism. Free market capitalism is something that has made us a wealthy nation. It has allowed people to lift them up. It has funded many wonderful things and created innovations for the whole world. As CEO of a public broadcasting station, I deal a lot in the public side, not in free market capitalism side. And I spend a lot of time talking about the value of things public, and generally it goes very well. But every once in a while I'll meet somebody who's sort of an extremist proselyting for the free market side of things. They're such an extremist that they take the position that the divine hand of capitalism will do everything if public things would just go away and capitalism were not regulated. Well, we all know that capitalism misbehaves at times, and the culture of greed takes over, and bubbles burst, and recessions and depressions hit, and the people on the lowest rungs of society are the ones that suffer the most. Somehow, it seems to me that the soul of America has to be about more than just free market capitalism and the buying and selling of stuff. Years ago, a businessman and I shared a taxi ride from Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. into the city. And that evening, as we were sitting in busy traffic right near the Washington Mall, I noticed my cab mate was staring at the mall very intently. And I love the Washington Mall. Of course, that's that big spread of grass and real estate that is sort of America's front lawn between the Lincoln Memorial and the Capitol building. It's the place where the people gather by the tens of thousands to say they want reform. It's the most American of spaces, in my view. My cab mate saw it very differently. He said, look at all that wasted space. All that empty space. We could do stuff with that space, and it's just sitting there. And sitting there, a public employee on a public tractor has to mow the public lawn, and we have to pay taxes for it. His idea was take a great American company like Disney and sell it to them, and let them build wonderful attractions there. Then people would come, it would make money, and we wouldn't have to pay to get the lawn mowed. Personally, I was horrified. He, on the other hand, seemed to think this was just a really solid idea. Ironically, I have evidence that capitalism doesn't have the capacity to do everything we need it to do all the time. And I find that in my own world of public media. Some of you are old enough to remember back in the 1980s when cable was beginning to happen. And it seemed like almost every week a new channel was appearing on the dial, a new cable channel. And one of the things that was occurring was many of these cable channels were taking genres that we developed in public television and making channels out of them. Art and performance genre, history, travel, cooking, and those became channels. And people were saying public media isn't needed anymore because cable is taking care of that. Of course, ironically, the divine hand of capitalism soon moved to give back all those channels to public television. How did that happen? Well, it turns out that when you exist to treat the audience as citizens instead of customers, you can't deliver the shareholder value and meet the bottom line that the corporations that own these cable channels expect. And so the channels began to change. And you ended up with a channel that was devoted to history with shows about ancient aliens building the pyramids of Egypt, space aliens, I mean. And of course, on the channel that was built for art and performance, there hasn't been a concert or a play in decades. Those things all ended. Well, the point here is not that public media is good and for-profit media is bad. We do exist to serve different masters. It's also true that if public media were privatized, as some have advocated, we would have to begin behaving just like the others do for our survival, and public TV and radio as you know it would disappear in America. I have a bias about this, obviously, but my bias is in part about the fact that ever since thinking about this national soul thing, I've been really convinced that public media is important to a nation's national soul, and I give you as evidence for that the fact that in most Western democracies, it seems that they spend hundreds of times per citizen on their public media that we do. And they have commercial channels there now too. Well, why would they even do that? The reason is, in those countries they see that public media is the place where the nation's history, the nation's culture, the nation's stories, the odd issues about that country, the unique things and its own self-consciousness and its own confidence, and everything in that country that tells you what it means to be a Brit or a Swede is reflected on public media. And the governments of those countries like preserving the souls of those countries and those people having that sense of that. Now, I don't think that anytime soon we're going to find ourselves doing a national sing-along in the United States. We're probably too big and diverse for that. But you know, there are a lot of things that contribute to our national soul that exist in this country. And most of them, in my view, live in the nonprofit and public sector. Whether it's the University of California system, the wonderful nonprofit Khan Academy, that guy who has 10,000 students who learn math at their own speed thanks to his brilliance, whether it's nonprofit journalism, which now exists in many cities, often online because newspapers and television stations have cut back on their investigative reporting and don't do as much true journalism as they used to. So that's even happening in a nonprofit way. There are any number of things that you find in that world of nonprofit and philanthropy. But those things all, including many of them that I just mentioned, have to fight to survive. They struggle year after year, and it's always touch and go, just as it is for us in public media. Could the soul of a country be reflected on how much money it spends on the things that are available to all the people? You know, the culture of freedom is great, but through the nonprofit and public sector, it emerges into a culture of caring, a culture of taking care of one another. And the citizenry must commit to the public sector because it needs nurturing. And if we don't nurture it, and if we aren't positive about it, and if we don't help nonprofits, and if we don't say, hey, it's okay to pay a few tax dollars so that we can all be okay at a certain level, then our soul, in my opinion, is in jeopardy. In the nonprofit sector, in the public sector, we find an America with less ruthlessness, less of a dog-eat-dog attitude. We find a place where winning doesn't mean that there has to be a loser somewhere else. You know, we're all a part of this American democracy experiment together. And as such, America must work for us, and all of us. And we must work for America. And if we can do that and strengthen and support the not-for-profit sectors in this country, then we actually will have those sectors provide for us this unifying glue. And then we'll be able to truly know our national soul. Thank you.